So you want to break into advertising and you're thinking to yourself, shit, what now? Well, in this episode, I talked to Tom Goodwin. Now, some of you might have already heard of him and seen his videos on YouTube or follow him on Twitter. But what really interested me about Tom was his career trajectory and moving from different disciplines to different types of agencies. So I feel he has a really well-rounded opinion of what makes an impressive graduate when they walk through the door. This episode is filled with all kinds of tips and tricks that you can take into your interviews and land the career you want instead of the job you hate. Please remember to like and subscribe below. And as always, enjoy the episode. Hey Tom, welcome to Shit Right Now. Thank you so much for coming on today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Pleasure to have you on here and to finally meet you. I've been read your book and following you on Twitter the last couple of years, and liking and perhaps retweeting some of your comments has been great. So it's great to finally chat to you.
I'll try not to be too disappointing after all that.
Oh no, I'm sure we're in for a ripper of an episode. So Tom, for those who are watching, a lot of them are grads looking to break into the industry and advertising specifically. But could you please tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, in a way, it's probably unhelpful for me to talk that much about what I do now because I am a bit of an anomaly in a way. But in short, I now run my own consulting company called All We Have Is Now, which is sort of taking advertising thinking and imagination to management consulting. I'm also presenting a TV show, actually, which hasn't been announced yet. So this is breaking news.
Check you out.
Yeah, exactly. I'm famous, which is all about following people who are doing amazing things with new technology around the world. But I have spent about 20 years now in advertising in various roles. So hopefully I can be a little bit helpful to your audience. And that includes everything from media agencies to digital agencies to PR agencies. You know, I moved on quite quickly as people got fed up with me. So.
And in that, I know that you started in a traditional account person role, then moved into new business, then strategy and innovation. So you've changed lanes a few times, which has been interesting. But take me back to the start, Tom. How did you break in?
It's always a very good question to ask people, actually, and I would recommend for people listening to this that they, you know, if they do know people in the industry, they ask them this, because probably unlike most professions, there definitely is no predominant way. You know, there are schemes that happen and some people come into it in a tidy way. There are people who enter it because they do a degree in advertising or marketing. But most of the people I know, and this is perhaps a little bit rude, but most of the people I know that in particular are very good or have accomplished great things have often come into it from a very strange way. I studied architecture and structural engineering, which meant that I did some stuff which is creative and some stuff which was numerical. That also meant I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I presumed I wanted to be a management consultant because they got paid tons of money. And then I thought I might be an investment banker because they got paid even more. But when I interviewed for them, it was very apparent that I wasn't very good at those things, and also they were very boring to me, so I got completely lost, slightly despondent, got a summer job working in an office for an entertainment company, and after sort of 3 months of helping out doing random things in an office, the sort of boss sort of brought me into his office and said, Tom, you know, you can't really be here that much longer, we're running out of money. But I'm going to, you know, give you some advice on what you should do. And I think that's advertising. I'd never ever heard of advertising before, really. You know, I think I'd got up to sort of archaeology in the A to Z guide of careers, not that far. And I kind of looked into it. I was quite late. So at that point, there was only sort of 2 grad schemes that were left for that year. So I thought, shit, I should probably apply to those. And I got interview requests for one of those 2. Did the opening rounds interviews for TBWA, absolutely loved it. It was extraordinary to me because it was the one job interview that when I prepared for, I actually found it quite interesting. And when the people who were interviewing me, I thought, wow, these are people who'd be great to hang out with. So I got a very, very strong feeling that it was actually the right career for me. But I failed. I got through to the last 12 and they picked 7 of us and I was not one of those. So probably the worst day of my life, actually, in a way. I was incredibly upset, realized that this was the love of my life, working in this industry. I got offered another job working for GlaxoSmithKline in their grad scheme doing sales. So after 3 years, I'd figured out how to make quite a lot of money in sales and had a company car. And I sort of got promoted quite quickly and I had this quite nice life. But I realized that I really missed advertising. So I wrote to the person that had interviewed me at the final stage, Jonathan Mildenhall, who's quite well known. And I said, Jonathan, I'm not sure if you remember me, but I now earn more money than I ever thought I would, doing less work than I'd like to do. I should probably, can we chat about me doing the opposite in advertising? And then lo and behold, have invited me down. He said, sure, I remember you, come into the office next week and I'll introduce you to some people. And then I kind of almost had like a sort of miniature graduate intake day again, where I just met up with 5 or 6 people. People liked me. And I was offered a job as an account manager for TBWA in London, where I then proceeded to be one of the worst account managers they'd ever had. But that's another story. So
Brilliant. And yeah, what a story that is. I think there's you're absolutely right. The best people do end up finding the most unique ways getting into advertising, because they're often the people who are the most passionate.
I mean, one has to be really careful of survivorship bias, because your podcast is not talking to people who are accountants that loved advertising but they never got offered the job, and your podcast talking to pilots who were dreaming of working for Saatchi or Saatchi, and then they ended up as a pilot by mistake. So one never wants to sound too smug. Luck plays an enormous role in all of this, but there is an expression within the world of film which is somewhat contentious, and it basically says that everyone who should have written a screenplay that gets turned into a film will end up doing that. And there is some sense that perhaps if you are right for this industry, you will make it eventually. And I think there could be truth to that. I think if you are right, then you will make it. And if you are wrong, then you will not. Or you might and then get thrown out. But I think, the more you can think about yourself and the more that you can be honest with yourself, and the more you can look into the industry, these things do end up feeling a bit more like a marriage, than a job. And therefore you should have a strong feeling that this is meant to be in some shape or form.
Yeah, I love that. It's one of the sort of things I talk about a lot is, you're better off finding a career than having a job. And I think it kind of echoes what you're saying there, right?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, and these words sound quite pretentious, but I think a career in advertising actually goes beyond a feeling of a career. And this is horribly wanky, but it does kind of become a lifestyle. I've been through periods of time where I've worked incredibly hard and been very stressed. And my parents have phoned me up and they've said, oh my God, it sounds horrendous. You're working your nuts off. And I've been saying, no, these are the best days I've ever had. They phoned me up and told me to jump on a plane and fly to Tokyo. And they're like, oh my God, that sounds horrendous. And I'm like, no, this is what I'm born for. So there is a lot of organ rejection that happens in this field, because there are just some people that are not right for it. It doesn't mean they're not good enough. It just means they want different things and they aspire to different feelings about their job. But I, for one, have loved the kind of immersion of it. There's almost nobody in advertising that I wouldn't love getting stuck in an elevator with. We're an industry full of really remarkable, lovely people as far as I'm concerned. And it's always been a privilege to work in that, but not everyone will feel the same way. So,
yeah, definitely. And you can spot those people straight away when you're interviewing them as well. You can just tell from their whole ethos and demeanor from walking into the room that you go, okay, this person's on the right foot, the right thing. And let's just have a chat and find out a bit more about you. I'm less interested in your achievements, academic achievements, but more so what have you done to persevere and what interests you and what gets you going?
That's actually a very good point. Like, I have done a lot of graduate interviews over the years, and the slightly tricky thing is in that time I've moved from the UK to the US. But I always knew that if I really enjoyed an interview, like if I just was talking to them, again, it's like a date, if time goes, and kind of, they're calling last orders at the bar and you've had 5 drinks and you haven't known it. A good graduate interview should feel the same. It doesn't mean they're saying the right thing.
Yeah, you need to know that a lot of things you did weren't first date appropriate.
It just means they're thinking, God, like, this person's great, Wouldn't it be good if they were on the bus on the way home when I go home, because then I can talk to them a bit more? It should feel like that, and it should be reciprocal as well. So,
absolutely. And as a pointer as well, it's a lot of agencies are willing to invest in people that might not have the knowledge of processes and what have you, but if you just show the desire and the ambition, then that can be taught, right? But I personally feel you can't teach an attitude or a mindset that makes you right for the industry. What's your opinion on that?
I care about nothing other than core sort of characteristics and values. And that doesn't mean that other people within large companies feel the same. There'll be people that think that going to Oxford University is very exciting. There'll be lots of people within the recruitment process who deliberately use things like education as a way to weed out people in a very effective way that nobody can take offense at. No one can be appalled that we got rid of people who had 3rd-class degrees or that didn't have a degree. But I do travesty, because literally the only thing I care about is attitude. And curiosity is by far, and I really mean that, by far the most important thing. And I just think, is this someone that I want to spend time with? That doesn't mean they should like me. Again, we've got a huge problem with diversity in the industry, because most people like spending time with people who are quite like them. It's much better to be with someone that plays golf, because it means that you might get on their golf course. Or if you work with someone that supports the same football team, you get to go and watch the match and high five. But actually, personally, again, I'm quite unusual. I'd much rather talk to someone who's come from a completely different background. I'd much rather have really good arguments with someone because they have very different political opinions to me. But I love spending time with people who are great and just are entertaining and, articulate and provocative. And yeah, I think we're ashamed of that. We're ashamed of the fact that actually being charismatic might be quite important, or that holding people's it might be quite important, or having a good sense of humor might be important, because those seem like quite facile, sort of silly, childish things. But actually, if you've been working through the night on a pitch and someone plays a really good joke on you, like, it's really funny. Like, it produces in the air. It makes you feel happy to be around these people. It forms bonds. So there definitely is a sort of advertising character that has somewhat diminished over the years, but is still there. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So in your opinion, Tom, you've been through, I'm sure, plenty of interviews, both on the interviewee side and the interviewer side.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, how do you interview, other than showing great attitude, how does someone interview well?
So I think what we get wrong in any job search process is we're very we're very keen to do things that show that we're trying. Sounds like that awful kind of expression, like, if I only had 30 minutes to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 29 sharpening the axe or something. Yeah. But I think it's really, really, really important that people are very, very honest and introspective about themselves, and, talk to other people around you. And have a very strong sense of what you're about. And this will change. And, most people in advertising are quite lost at times in their life, and they don't know who they are and they don't know what they're good at. But it's well worth just thinking, what am I incredibly good at? Like, what if I died tomorrow? Like, what would the planet miss out on? And it may be jokes, it may be insights, it may be ideas. So think about what you're incredibly good at. Think about what you really enjoy doing. And it's quite likely that those two things align, because generally speaking, people like doing things that they're good at, but they might not. And then have a think about what's really, really useful to the world. Because if you're incredibly good at, bench pressing heavy weights, then that's wonderful, but it's not necessarily going to be that helpful in advertising. If you're incredibly persuasive, that's going to be helpful for some aspects of advertising, but not all roles within advertising. So by thinking about this stuff, it creates a degree of alignment, I think, within yourself that then will allow you to perform very well, because you will then spend the time that you need to research the industry, spend time that you need to research the people it's likely that you will meet. And I would go so far as to say, if you're really right for this industry, and if you put in quite a lot of effort in preparation for an interview, you've probably got about an 80% plus chance of getting the job.
Yeah.
And I say that primarily because most people don't do any preparation. The last 5 years, I've probably done 50 graduate interviews. If I ever say to them, why this company, they look at you like you've pulled out a completely crazy question. If you ever say something like, which of our clients would you like to work on? They clearly do not have any idea what clients you work on.
Yeah.
And it's not just flattery. It's just a sense that these people are, conscientious and that they have thought about it. And it's really, really clear in an interview who's prepared and who hasn't. And apart from anything else, if you're interested in advertising, you should be thinking this stuff anyway. You should be aware of what their best ad ever was. You should be aware of whether they've won something at Cannes. You should be aware of what the name of the COO is and the CEO. You should be aware of some of the ads they've done because you've just been paying attention to them. So it shouldn't be that hard. But it's remarkable how few people do that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Tom. And I almost cringe sometimes when you ask that question and you just go like, mate, this was going so well. Or someone makes a bold claim on their CV, and then you ask them to substantiate it and then they can't answer it.
I don't think you have the facilities for that, big man.
Actually, you've let on to a really nice thing there, which is, I don't think people realize it, but when you are interviewing, you want the person to be brilliant. Like, you're not there hoping that you say something really clever and then they break down in bits. You're not hoping to do like a gotcha moment with their resume. Basically everyone we ever meet is great, and you want them to be brilliant at everything. And you want to have this really hard problem, which is that everyone that you met was fantastic. Everyone is wishing you well. One final thing I'd say, actually, which is, this makes me sound old, but this has been a very recent thing, where people talk a lot about themselves. And this sounds quite contrary to what I said before about, characteristics and so on. But I genuinely get the feeling that most people in interviews these days think that the world does rotate around them. And say things like, well, I love advertising because I've always wanted to do a job where you could, travel the world and see fun things. And I love the idea of a job where I can work from home sometimes. And I love the idea of a job where I can do it part-time if I need to. And, I want to make sure that this is a job where you're not expecting me to be in the office every day. And you kind of start thinking, wait a minute, like primarily we are trying to find someone for our needs, our role as an employer is not to find everything you want and then satiate your needs. It's not to work around you and to create policies to make you happy. Primarily we need someone to pull their weight and to get on well with the client and to do great work. And obviously your happiness is important to us, but it's not the most important thing every day for us. So
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as we're drawing towards the end of this discussion, I want to talk to getting a foot in the door, because I feel like that's probably the hardest part of the entire journey. And just to pull a quote from your book, the barrier to disruptive innovation often isn't knowing enough. It's knowing way too much about how things have always been. And I thought that really jumped out to me, because when you think about it, the way that we've applied for jobs, the way that whole system runs has been more or less the same for the last 15 years, really, bar psychometric tests, which I actually think are a step backwards, in my opinion. What have been some of the most innovative ways you've seen grads get attention and get a foot in the door?
There's always the classic things that people do, especially creatives, to get noticed, and it sometimes can be incredibly advantageous. But I think being a little bit more thoughtful and less dramatic is quite useful. Now, two things. One is the industry has changed an awful lot. Like when I was in the business of trying to get into advertising, it was extremely hard to find out much about it. There were websites you could see people's clients, but actually to find out who worked for agencies was hard. To meet up with people within advertising, if you didn't have a network, was very intimidating. And I certainly remember going into interviews being aware that there were lots of people whose mums worked in advertising who knew lots about it, and it felt quite nepotistic and quite small, and it was terrifying to see the degree to which people had already formed relationships. So if it's appropriate to you and your personality type, then I do think getting in touch with some people and making it clear that you're asking for a favor, being quite respectful about how much time you're asking for, but by saying, can you give me 5 minutes on the phone? I'd love to know a bit more about the difference between you and agency X. I think that's a good thing to do. But generally speaking, I think it's now very different in that people like me are on Twitter, sharing way too much and sharing quite intimate thoughts that we have. It's now incredibly easy to follow, 20,000 people on Twitter, probably who work in the industry. It's extremely easy to find out who works well where on LinkedIn. It's very easy to go on YouTube and to see the ads that agencies make. So it's actually pretty easy to be informed these days. And again, this shouldn't be work. When I did my preparation for jobs in investment banking, I'd sit on a train for 2 hours preparing for my interview, and I would never read the industry magazines because they're incredibly boring, and it would be work for me to try and do research. It's not work for me to walk down the road and to look at some of the ads in phone boxes. It's not work for me to be on websites and to take a look at the banner ads and see what they're trying to say. It's not work for me to try and buy a Tesla and to see what the booking flow feels like. That's just how I live life. So without sounding really obnoxious, I think if this career is meant for you, all of this stuff will seem easy. Your interviews will feel fun. Meeting people will be a delight. Doing research before you meet people will be enjoyable. And if it's not, then be honest that maybe this isn't the right area for you.
That's it. It will almost feel intuitive.
I think so. Yeah. I did zero preparation. I mean, it's a whole other story, but for the grad interview at TBWA, I got the day wrong. So I came in without my presentation ready and hadn't done any research on the agency, which again goes completely contrary to what I said before. But I realized that, when I was sat in someone's office and they were saying, Tom, why does his ad look like this? And why did they choose that headline? And why did they choose this image? I just said things which were quite clever and apparently correct. And that's just because instinctively I was quite appropriate for this industry. So
yeah, brilliant. Well, Tom, as we draw to a close, are there any parting thoughts that you wanted to share with our aspiring ad grads out there?
No, I would say gracious tenacity is quite useful. You never know what you are going to get until you ask for it. So it is a good time and industry to be tenacious, but also be quite gracious about it. So if after this anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'm sure you can find my email. I'm sure you can find my website, and just send me a note saying I want 3.5 minutes of your time, and I'm going to ask you this question. That's a very good way to go about these things. Brilliant.
Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough for coming on to Shit What Now today and sharing all your insights. And I'll let you enjoy your wine in Florida.
My pleasure. Great to meet you, Chris.
Cheers.